Welcome into the Noob Sports 2.0 show. I am your host, Alec Bussey. Happy to be joined by Amber Williamson and Vincent Graziano. We've got a lot of fun topics to discuss here tonight, including greatest sports fan bases across different leagues. We have greatest NFL player of all time. We have what matters more to an individual player's legacy, the amount of rings they have or their stats throughout their career. So let's get right to it. We are going to start with the greatest fan base in sports. Vincent, I'll let you go ahead and start first with your NFL team.
So this one was a close one, but between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Green Bay Packers, but I'm going to have to go with Pittsburgh in the end. The terrible towel is one of the most iconic fan items in all sports. I mean, obviously in Wisconsin, the Cheeseheads with the Packers, but I'm going to go with Pittsburgh. One analyst wrote that at Super Bowl 40, Steelers fans outnumbered Seahawks fans 25-1. And ESPN also ranked the Steelers fan base number one in the entire NFL. They have a 6-year season ticket waiting list and 299 consecutive sellout games.
Amber, what you got for NHL? I know you're a big hockey fan, so I'm sure you've got a real good take here.
Yeah, so for NHL, I'm going to have to go with the Toronto Maple Leafs simply because of the pure dedication of the fan base. I mean, they have not won a Stanley Cup since 1967, and yet they are still having 99% attendance at every single one of their games, and they have the second most Twitter followers of any of the NHL teams. And to go that long without winning a championship and still hold that much of a fan base, that takes some true dedication. So I've got to give a major shout out to those fans.
Yeah, so I'll give my Major League Baseball take. I'm a huge baseball person. I think there's a lot of franchises. You can argue, I think the Cubs probably have the biggest following of any team in Major League Baseball. I'm sure the Yankees are right there, as well as the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Cardinals, being in a smaller market, though, always seem to have really good attendance numbers. Going back to 2014, they are in the top 2-3 every single year of attendance, and they're over 3 million total fans every year. And I know Cardinal fans have had a lot to cheer for over the last 10, 20 years, a couple World Series, several National League Championship teams, and a couple pennant-winning teams as well. So the Cardinals are definitely in that conversation. But if you're going to give it to someone over the last couple of years, I feel like you kind of have to feel sorry for the Dodgers with everything that happened in that 2017 World Series to stick around and come back and win that again, to get back to the World Series in 2020, win the World Series. Their first one since 1988. That's obviously the Kirk Gibson arm pump home run. The Dodgers definitely deserve it. There's a lot of teams in Major League Baseball, I feel like, who kind of jockey for that position on a year-to-year basis. But I'm going to go Dodgers, Yankees, Cardinals, Cubs. They're all in that conversation for me. All right, guys, I'm going to make this conversation a little bit more broad. Let's go to college football. Obviously, there's a lot of programs across the country. The SEC is known for packed crowds of over 75,000 in just about every single stadium. The Big Ten's obviously got a few really good programs with Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and of course Nebraska sells out Lincoln on every Saturday basis. And obviously out west, you have USC and you have Oregon as well. So what kind of opinions do you guys have for greatest college sports fan base, particularly on the football side?
So I'm going to head down to the Swamp down in Gainesville. The Gators, every weekend they have packed crowds. The fans are electric. I mean, often you see a lot of times on breakaway touchdowns in the Swamp, it's one of the loudest roars you'll hear in all of college sports. I mean, the Gator Chomp, that's really an electric place to play. I mean, ever since Tim Tebow played there, it was just a crazy atmosphere, and lots of other players in the country said it's one of the toughest places to play in all of college football.
Amber, what you got?
Yeah, so I'm going to have to be a little biased here and go with my Virginia Tech Hokies for the simple fact of Enter Sandman. I mean, that entrance, a football team cannot go up against that and not feel a little bit intimidated by the crowd size there. Just the magnitude of that alone has registered on the earthquake scale. I mean, coming into play against teams and fans that are so dedicated like that, it's going to be pretty intimidating. So I've got to give it to the Hokies for this one.
Surprised no one mentioned LSU. I feel like LSU's had a lot of fans kind of come up in the last 2 years, especially with the Joe Burrow and Coach O mania that went on a couple of years ago. You mentioned the earthquake skill for Virginia Tech. I didn't know about that. I do know that Wisconsin, though, with their jump around that they do in their student section before the start of the fourth quarter, does make Camp Randall legitimately shake. I've had friends in that stadium when they do jump around, and they say feeling a shake is just incredible to see all those kids jumping up and down. So I'm going to give Wisconsin a nod here. I don't know if they deserve to be in the conversation with some of these other schools. I'm going to go Alabama, though. I mean, when you talk about how successful they've been and how blessed their fans have been to watch their program win championship after championship, I think their fans are just starting to grow and get more and more passionate and more hungry. Let's keep the conversation going, but let's shift to college basketball before we switch back to the pro side. I think this one maybe is a little bit easier for us to kind of debate. Obviously, we've got the Blue Bloods, we've got Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, obviously, and of course, Kentucky. And if you want to go out west, we've got UCLA, and let's focus on the Midwest a little bit. We can give Indiana some love as well. All right, Amber, I'll let you go first. Who's your first school that comes to mind when you think of fan base in college basketball?
It's got to be Duke. I mean, that stadium is electric when it's time for games, and it's not even just a student section. The alumni go crazy as well. And the main reason that some people even watch Duke basketball is just to see what crazy thing the fans are going to come up with next. So it's got to be Duke.
Vincent, go ahead.
I'm not going to stray away from what Amber said. It's tough to go against that. I mean, obviously Coach K just announced he's going to be retiring. So, I mean, I'm interested to see if that changes the atmosphere at all. I mean, he's such a big part of that program. And as you know, there's been some big names go through in the past years, but last year Duke wasn't as successful. And I mean, we're starting to see some players take their talents elsewhere, like HBCUs and other schools across the country. So I'm interested to see if Coach K leaving has an impact on recruiting and maybe the atmosphere at Cameron as well.
It's hard for me to argue against the Cameron Crazies and the Dukies as well. I would like to give some love to Kansas, though. Fog Allen Fieldhouse is obviously one of the most difficult places to play in the country. It's a massive stadium. They sell it out every single night. But I'm going to give the nod to Duke. I think North Carolina obviously deserves some credit here. The Dean Dome is known for being really loud as well. And I think we all remember the shot that Indiana hit against Kentucky, was that 7-8 years ago now, with how loud Assembly Hall in Bloomington got. So there's definitely a lot of good ones in college basketball as well. All right, let's shift back to the pro sports with the NBA. Let's hit Vincent first. What you got? Who's your number one NBA fan base right now?
So right now I'm going to have to go with the Celtics. I mean, throughout the years, they've just been such a great team. They've won so many championships, and I mean, it's hard to go against them. They've had some struggles, and a lot of people have been calling for change in the front office. So I'm going to be interested to see how that goes down the road. But this is one of the more loyal fan bases in the NBA, and I don't think there's many other teams that match the enthusiasm that the Celtics fans do.
Amber, how about you go give your one? I know you've got a good one for us that you did some good research on.
Yeah, so I'm thinking Golden State Warriors in this because they have the highest local television rating for 2018 to 19. And they're one of the league's top selling for merchandise, especially for Steph Curry's jersey. So, I mean, it's hard to go somewhere without even seeing somebody wearing something with Golden State Warriors on it. I feel like I see that every day. So I think it's them.
I'm going to go down the state of California a little bit here. I'm going to go with the Lakers. I feel like the Lakers and the Celtics are probably they're easily the two most historic franchises in NBA history. You look at what the Lakers have been able to accomplish in different eras with different players. They definitely gained a few in the last several years with LeBron signing over there as a free agent. And LeBron obviously has a really strong following of fans. So I'm going to give the Lakers a nod here. I think that's obviously one of the more passionate ones. Our last one, any soccer ones that we should get in here before we move on to a different topic? Anyone you guys want to hit on?
I'm not a huge soccer follower, but I know the sport is huge in Europe, and I'm sure there's some pretty insane fan bases. I've heard some pretty crazy stories about fans in Europe, and I think if I was more into it, I'd know a little bit more, but I'm not too sure.
I would say Chelsea. Chelsea would be my pick for it. I mean, they're the biggest one that I've heard around here, like in the United States, of people being pretty excited about. So I think it's them.
I think internationally, I feel like Barca, especially in the U.S., has a pretty good following of what they've been able to do with Messi. Obviously, Neymar in the past, and they had Suarez as well. Here's another one, Liverpool. Liverpool kind of on the same lines that you had there, Amber, with the Maple Leafs. Really didn't have a lot of success, especially championship-wise, for the longest time, and they finally broke through. I think it was last year, 2 years ago. I'm sure their fans are really appreciative of that. All right, let's switch over to a different topic. What is more important for a player's legacy, the amount of championships they have or the stats that they have accumulated over their career? Amber, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I'm really passionate about this one. I definitely think, okay, so I love stats. I've been quoting stats this entire time, but I think I've got to go with championships because, okay, so nobody's going to remember that Sidney Crosby scored the most goals in 2016 to 2017. They're going to be like, in a couple of years, wow, he has 3 Stanley Cups. Championships are what people remember. And I mean, we can even look back into the debate with Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, going like way back about which one is better. Okay, yes, Wilt Chamberlain might have all the best stats, but Bill Russell came around with 11 championships. That's what people are going to talk about.
Vincent, what you got? You going to agree or you disagree a little bit?
I'm actually going to disagree here. So I think it's a pretty subjective question. I think as far as individual sports go, like golf, if Tiger Woods had come in top 10 in, say, all the tournaments he won, I don't think we'd be talking about him as the greatest golfer of all time, and he wouldn't be the icon that he is today. Or, for example, in the UFC, we're not going to be talking about a guy who lands 100 strikes in every fight but gets knocked out in the last round. I mean, doesn't win a championship, never has a belt. We're not going to be talking about those guys. So I think championships for individual sports are much more important. But if we shift over to team sports, I think it changes. I think it's hard to control your team and the cards you're dealt. So if we look at baseball, for example, if you ask anyone in our generation, who do you think is the greatest baseball player that we've seen play? I mean, you're going to get at least an 80% Mike Trout. Mike Trout's played in 3 playoff games in his entire career. And I think by the time his career is said and done, we're going to be looking at him as one of the greatest, if not the greatest baseball player of all time. So
Yeah,
I think
I'll contribute here. I think there's a happy medium you have to kind of hit. I don't think there's one specific answer that you can take here. And I like how you mentioned Olympic sports or individual sports there, Vincent. I mean, I think there's no doubt that Michael Phelps is probably the greatest Olympian ever with his, 20 plus gold medals now, or at least 20 total medals. And obviously he had the 8 gold medals in the Beijing Olympics. And Simone Biles probably being the greatest gymnast of all time. In my opinion, she's probably one of the 3 greatest athletes of the last 20 years. But you have to kind of balance it out. I think let's use LeBron James as an example. I think this is a good one. He's accumulated incredible stats. He's passed Jordan, who a lot of people always consider to be the greatest player of all time, and a lot of those individual stats. But he doesn't have the same amount of rings. He's got Jordan has 6. LeBron obviously only has 4. So I think when you're able to get that happy medium, you can kind of strike the conversation of, all right, this player deserves to be in there, but maybe they don't have, the rings that this player in the past had before them. So I think it's a difficult conversation to have, but I think it's interesting to have as well because you can make an argument for either side. And I think I like what Vincent said there with it's hard to control what your team does and what you have around you, especially in football and especially in baseball, where those sports have so many more people on a court or a field than basketball, where there's just 5 guys on the court at a time with your team. I mean, how many great NFL players have never won a championship? Let's look. I mean, Barry Sanders, a lot of people consider him to be one of the greatest running backs of all time. He never won anything, really, with the Lions. And obviously the Lions aren't a very good franchise historically, but you can do the same thing in baseball. I mean, Ken Griffey Jr. never won a World Series with the Mariners or the Cincinnati Reds, and he's widely regarded as one of the top 5 center fielders of all time, and some people may even consider him the greatest baseball player of all time, and he never won anything, but his numbers speak for themselves. So I think it's a really interesting conversation to have, Amber.
Yeah, so I do have a couple more comments with that. I think, of course, with individual sports like swimming, it's going to be about the stats a little bit more than it is with a team sport. Because the way I look at it if you're playing a team sport and you're not winning the championships, then it means you're not a team player. At least that's how I look at it personally. You can have the greatest stats ever, but do you guys remember the 2017 Foot Locker commercial with Russell Westbrook?
Yeah.
And they were like naming all the stats and random stuff, and he said it's all about getting the wins. That's all that matters, and that's still how I look at it as well.
Vince, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a good point. I mean, as far as going through players' legacies, I'm still going to stick with stats. I mean, like, as far as teams go and franchises go, championships obviously more important as opposed to who came through your franchise and all that stuff. But you're looking at guys like, even a guy like, say, Chris Paul, one of the greatest point guards ever, and he's still going through his career. He's making a run right now with the Suns, but he's never won a championship. He had a great teammate in Blake Griffin. He's one of the greatest passers of all time. They had Lob City in Los Angeles, but you look at a guy like that who's widely regarded as one of the greatest ever, and he's got no championships. There's only one team every year that wins a championship, and it's hard to be on a team and be that guy because we've seen through many pro sports now, like with LeBron, Tom Brady, guys dominate. And we're not talking about exactly the greatest of all time conversation, but as far as individual player legacies go, I don't think championships are going to be able to determine everything in a player's legacy.
I like how you mentioned the point guard situation there with Chris Paul. Obviously, he hasn't had a lot of success in the playoffs, and you hit on that. Here's another point guard who didn't really win anything until the end of his career. Jason Kidd didn't win an NBA Finals until 2011 with the Mavericks. And, I mean, the Mavericks obviously weren't the better team in that series against the Miami Heat. But Jason Kidd, I think, is widely regarded as one of the better point guards of all time. I don't think he's in the conversation, with Magic. But even another one who, I mean, this guy holds the all-time assist record, John Stockton, is often widely forgotten in the conversation of greatest point guards of all time. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, well, one, he didn't win a championship, and this kind of goes along with what Amber was saying a little bit earlier. But two, it's hard to judge some players in some eras because of what was going on in the league around him. I mean, the Bulls dominated the 1990s with Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, obviously as well, and the second three-peat, and in the first three-peat, they had those two and Horace Grant. So you kind of, it's like I said, you have to find that happy medium where you're able to connect the different dots to best form your argument as why you should be a Hall of Famer, or why you should be considered one of the greatest of all time at your position or at your sport.
Yeah, exactly. And there's hundreds and hundreds of athletes who we see in Hall of Fames that never were able to get that championship. It's elusive for a lot of guys and a lot of women as well. And I think it's just hard to win a championship in today's day and age.
Well, it's like we were talking about earlier with Tom Brady. I think the reason he is the GOAT is because he's got both, right? So he's like beating all the statistical records, and he's also got the most championships.
All right, let's transition to that with Tom Brady. You kind of led me into it real well there, Amber. Let's move over to that. You mentioned Tom Brady being the GOAT, Amber, but do you think he's the greatest football player of all time?
100%. I definitely believe he is. He's won 7 Super Bowls. So that's the most of any player, like a specific player, by 2, but it is more than any other individual team has. You've got to be pretty good if you have more than any of the other NFL teams.
Vincent, what you got?
So I don't think there's really much question now, but I think down the road, as far as talent goes, I think Patrick Mahomes definitely has a chance to catch him. I mean, Patrick Mahomes has been nothing short of phenomenal. So far, he's played 3 full seasons. Obviously, his rookie year he only played 1 game, but he's averaging more yards per game than Brady, more touchdowns per game than Brady. And I think that Patrick Mahomes, in my opinion, out of all the quarterbacks I've ever watched, has the greatest arm and has some of the greatest skills I've ever seen out of any quarterback. And I think although Brady beat him last year in the Super Bowl, which is going to take a lot for Mahomes to come back, I think he's going to end up catching him in a lot of statistical categories that people don't realize because he's so early in his career. I mean, he's only 3 years in as far as playing wise. And I think that at the end of the day, when he works through and continues to play the way he does, he's got playmakers around him. I think it's going to be closer than a lot of people think.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to argue against Brady as well for a lot of the reasons that you guys both mentioned. But something you didn't mention is that he's done it at the most important position, in my opinion, in all of sports. And he has the ball in his hands. He's the only player on a football field other than the center who has a ball put in his hands on every single play. Every single time that ball snapped and he's on offense, it's in his hands. And he kind of has the ability to change the game with one throw or an audible at the line of scrimmage. Like he has so much power on each individual play offensively for the New England Patriots for 17 years or whatever, how long it was. And then this past year with the Bucs as well. So it's hard for me to argue Brady, but if we're going to let's get away from the quarterback here. Who do you guys think is the greatest player ever that's not a quarterback? Do you have an opinion on that? Because quarterback to me has really started to kind of evolve into, if you're not a quarterback, it's really hard for you to win an MVP. It's really hard for you to maybe win Rookie of the Year in some years. But I think that if you broaden the conversation, you can kind of get some different names in there. Obviously, you can get some defensive names in there. You can get some running backs, wide receivers. I mean, as a Bears fan, I love Walter Payton, and Walter Payton is probably one of the Bears' 7 greatest quarterbacks of all time, unfortunately, because we've never had one. But I mean, Walter Payton had a cannon. So Walter Payton was an amazing athlete and was really, really successful on a football field, not just running the ball, but doing other things out of the backfield for the Bears.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I mean, it is hard, like you said, it's hard to stray away from the quarterback. But I mean, you look at guys like on defense, Deion Sanders. I mean, you're looking at amazing players that don't get recognized as much as the quarterback. Because I agree with you, it is one of the most important positions in sports. So it's hard to look at other guys when in the GOAT conversation. But there's a lot of guys who have had amazing careers that have been kind of looked over because of all the debate with Brady and all the quarterbacks that have come before him. But there is definitely a conversation for other players. And I mean, when you ask that first question, is he the greatest football player ever? I think Tom Brady is one of the smartest players to ever play the game. I mean, he's got amazing decision-making skills. And when I watch him play, it's not the first thing that jumps out is how big his arm is or how mobile he is. It's his decision-making. And I think he came up through a system where he was put in the right spot and he just had to read defenses and make the right throws. I mean, he's not averaging as many yards through the air as most guys. And I think it really shows how good of a decision maker he is and how he is the best quarterback, because I think coming with a quarterback, you have to be a good decision maker. You have to be able to read defenses. You have to be a smart football player.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Amber, you have anything to add?
I definitely agree with you guys that it's harder to get into that GOAT conversation if you're not a quarterback. But I think still looking at it, I've still got to go with Tom Brady, regardless of we're looking at quarterbacks or what positions. But yeah, I definitely agree it's harder to get into that conversation.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you guys as well. All right. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the Sports 2.0 channel on YouTube. We appreciate you guys for watching. Have a good night, and thank you for watching once again. We will see you next time on the new 2.0 Sports Network.